know, the coronavirus pandemic has had a major impact on all our lives and has affected the way we work. And that's the reason why this year's conference is virtual. The theme for this year's conference is Resilient Infrastructures, Shaping the Future of Education and Research in Nigeria. So over the next 3 days, we'll be looking at different aspects of our research and education ecosystem to discuss what needs to be done and how we as a research and education community need to adapt our practices and adopt new methods and tools and infrastructure in these COVID circumstances. So to kick off this second session of the conference, I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Donna Oti, who will be the moderator for this section. This session is called the Funding and Policy Innovation for Research and Education in Nigeria. Donna Oti has worked as a journalist, communication professor, student media advisor, and organizational development consultant. She spent 10 years in academia, achieving the rank of associate professor before embarking on a career in consulting. Most recently, she shared the people strategy for the CARICOM Secretariat Change Management Office in Georgetown, Guyana. She's currently an adjunct professor at Howard University and learning development consultant for the US Department of Defense Health Agency. She's passionate about working with diverse cultures, and I've had the pleasure of working with Donna in Nigeria and West Africa over the years. And she's done projects on 4 continents, and she received a BS from Tennessee Technological University, an MA from the American University, and a doctorate from Howard University. She's currently in Washington, DC, so she might also be able to give us an update on what's going on with the inauguration tomorrow. So Donna, I'd like to sort of hand over to you so you can sort of introduce our speakers for today and manage the Q&A. Thanks, Donna.
Okay, thank you very much for that warm introduction, and I promise I will not talk about politics at all. But it is an honor to be a part of this initiative. I've actually been familiar with Eko-Konnect for probably more than 12 years, first being aware of them through my work at the University of Jos. I think that's where we first met. This is a very important session, and I really am looking forward to taking away a lot from your expertise in the field, because it's something that working in this space, we know how important it is to be able to understand funding, to be able to identify funding, and then after receiving funding, to be able to implement projects in the most efficient way. So I'm actually excited about this. We're going to be having 3 speakers today. And before I introduce the speakers, we're going to have Dr. Mistress Olutu, we're going to have Leon Jones, and as well Tom Fryer. But before I introduce them, I just want to again, talk a little bit about procedure. We're going to introduce, each speaker will have approximately 15 minutes to make an introductory presentation, but we really want this to be as interactive as possible. So after each speech, we're gonna allocate some time for Q&A. I think that the group is manageable enough that you can actually raise your hand, so you can actually have real-time interactions with the speakers. But if you don't, for any reason, maybe you have a question and you would like to make sure that you capture, use the chat. So you can raise your questions in the chat, but as much as possible, I would like us to be able to have some of those real-time interactions that we would have been able to have if we were face-to-face. So hopefully after we do the 3 rounds of presentations, I think Owen has a presentation on behalf of our speaker who won't be able to make it today, Dr. Boubacar Barry. And then I hope that at the end, if we finish in time, I know you ran a little bit late this morning, but if we finish in time, I hope we can actually engage a little bit further, again, based on what are some questions that the audience may have that may not have been addressed throughout the presentation. So I'm going to get right into the first speaker. The first speaker that we're going to have for this morning her name is actually Dr. Mistress Gloria Isisi Olutu. And I apologize if I mispronounced any of those. She holds a PhD in policy analysis from the University of Abuja in Nigeria. She graduated from the University of Ilorin with a Bachelor of Science degree in accountancy. She holds a Master's of Science in Public Policy and Management from the University of London, and also an MBA from the Business School of the Netherlands. She's a qualified chartered accountant and is a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants in Nigeria. She is also a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Taxation of Nigeria and a member of the African Leadership Institute, and also a member of the Association for Public Policy Analysis and Management. I'm very much looking forward to Dr. Olutu's presentation. A warm welcome to you. I think you're still muted.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Thank you very much for that introduction as well. I do have some slides that are prepared, and I'm going to have to share my screen to get them. So let's get that started.
Someone has raised.
So can we see the screen? Although I can't even see myself.
We can't at the moment. Pius, is there an issue with her sharing her screen?
Okay, here we are.
Okay.
Can we see it now?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can see.
Yeah, that's good. So I'm going to be speaking on funding and policy innovation for research and education in Nigeria. I don't know if the introduction said that, but I currently work for an organization called TET Fund, Tertiary Education Trust Fund in Nigeria. And everything we do basically has to do with funding and the policy innovation in this area. So we're going to be hearing a lot about the kind of things that the fund has been doing, and opportunities for research funding within Nigeria. I have a brief outline right there, starting with an introduction, and I'll say a little about funding and research in general and some examples from a few countries, and then I will zero down on the TET Fund intervention, and then some of the policy innovations and initiatives that have recently come up, and then I'll be concluding with some recommendations. As an introduction, of course, we all know that education and research are the bedrock of development and advancement of nations. Without education, there can be no development. But experience has shown that education and research are very expensive ventures. And if they are to be carried out effectively, they will require a chunk of the national budget. And as a third world country or a developing country, sometimes we tend to look towards the developing world and for donor agencies. But there is a study that has shown that in recent times, in the last decade, development assistance for education has actually slowed down. So we need to look within, and that is why I commend organizations like Eko-Konnect for championing discourses like this to help us look into how we can make our education and research space what it ought to be in Nigeria. Talking about funding for education, we all may have heard, I may have seen that the recommendations show that at least 20% of the national budget, 15 to 20% of the national budget should be set aside for education. And most in most climes, they spend about 6% to 10% of their GDP on education. But of course, in Nigeria, it is definitely not like that. In Nigeria, most of the public education is free. And because of that, it has led to a lot of, industrial unrest. As we speak, the Academic Staff Union of universities, I think they're just about calling off their strike, all because they believe the government is not providing enough funding to run the sector. According to UNESCO, Nigeria commits a mere 3% of her GDP to education, and the budget has been hovering between 5 and 8% over the years. We have a table that tries to show the education allocation of the budget over the past 10 years. And if you can see, the graph is rather undulating and going down. In the current year, we have just 5% of the 2021 budget that has been dedicated to education. That is lower than in previous years. While that is so in Nigeria, we can see that there's an upward trend in other countries. This is a World Bank data graph that shows there's an upward trend in most countries in the area of funding. And that is how it ought to be, because in the 21st century, the knowledge economy rules. And so there's a lot. In fact, Budget, there's an organization in Nigeria that analyzes the Nigerian budget. It's called Budget. It says, whereas Nigeria is still spending just about 5% of its budget on education, a sister West African country, such as Ghana, spent 21% of its budget in 2014 on education. So many have advocated that, in line with international benchmarks, at least 15 to 20%, a much larger percentage than the 5% we are currently doing, should be committed to education and, by extension, research in Nigeria. I also need to say that apart from the budget allocations, there are several MDAs in Nigeria that contribute to education funding. I have them listed there, topmost of which is the Tertiary Education Trust Fund, where I work. We have the Universal Basic Education Commission. We have Petroleum Development Fund, the Central Bank itself. So many of these federal bodies or MDAs do a lot in the education space. When you take all of that together, we may not be doing as badly as 5%, but still there's room for more, because the enormity of the needs of the sector, coupled with our growing population, continues to dwarf government efforts. And so definitely we have to keep looking for ways to augment such funding. I have also a graph here just to show what the ideal situation should look like. For instance, Florida Association of Counties got this pie chart that shows 28% of the funding in that state goes to education. So just as a background. Now, in the area of research, the problem is even bigger, because there's no clear policy on funding research in Nigeria. And of course, when you look across the world, we see, like in the European countries that spend as much as 8% of their GDP on research. In Germany, there's the Federal Ministry of Education and Research. I particularly liked this because putting research right up front there, as part of what the Federal Ministry does, is something Nigeria can learn from. Committing loads of funding into this area. Of course, having gone through what happens, all around the world, I noticed that the private sector plays a very, very huge role. Donwa, PA Donwa in 2006 states that in many countries, over 50% of research funding comes from industry. So we really would not be looking at government alone when it comes to research and even education. And it is clear from education funding models around the world that a considerable part of the cost of education is sourced from sources other than government. I have this little image here that's from the UNESCO that revealed that private individuals provide 50% of education funding in Uganda, 33% in Cote d'Ivoire, and 25% in Vietnam. So having that background, we believe that Nigeria needs to take a cue from other countries. There are other examples where taxes are imposed on rubber, like Malaysia, where taxes are imposed on rubber, palm oil, and timber to fund their research institutes. Same scenario obtains for tea production in Sri Lanka, and on and on. In Brazil, when Brazil, as a fund, went there to sort of look at what they do in their research foundation, and we're told that they fund the foundation there called FAPESP with 1% of all state tax revenues. So reforming our tax laws in Nigeria to further support education and research in an innovative and forward-looking manner in line with 21st century challenges for national development is therefore an area that I believe we need to explore. Now I'm going to go straight to TET Fund. TET Fund is an organization in Nigeria that was set up in 1992. 2% tax called education tax is assessed on all profits of registered companies in Nigeria. We see it as a viable and sustainable arrangement for coordinating the involvement of the private sector in the funding of education in Nigeria. The special thing about this is that it's not subject to appropriation, doesn't go through the National Assembly. There's no, it's not budgeted for. It's not really added as part of the national budget. It's a special fund for education, and the money that is collected, we can see on that table in the last 3 years is substantial. If you look at the table, about in Naira, it's 2.1 trillion in the last 10 years. That comes to about 500 billion that has been collected as education tax over the past 10 years. Of course, we know that the problem of funding has persisted, even with TET Fund intervention. And that is because the budgets of government, if we look at what a budget sort of analyzed, for instance, in 2019, the federal government budget, 92% is for recurrent expenditure. And so all of capital expenditure has actually been left to the fund. And so over the years, the fund has intervened by providing essential physical infrastructure, buying materials and equipment. We've been into research and publications and academic staff training and development. Almost all capital funding across the entire tertiary education landscape in the past 2 or more decades has been by TET Fund. The fund has been quite successful. We know that it's a unique private and public partnership arrangement which enables the private sector to contribute directly. And as a tax, it cuts across. And of course, because it is tax-based, it is stable and sustainable. And so that has been on, and the tax has been growing. If you go back to the table, you see that over the years, the tax has grown right from about 142 billion, doubled to almost 300 billion as at last year. Now, talking about research is a core academic activity and has remained neglected in Nigeria's tertiary institutions due to lack of funds. From 2009, TET Fund began to intervene in research by providing the institutions with little monies to carry out some research. Now, there has been a more vigorous push by our new Executive Secretary, Professor Suleiman Boboro, to move research to the center stage. We'll see that as I proceed. The TET Fund research interventions have been three basic interventions. One we call institution-based research. Then we have the academic research journals, where we support our institutions in the production of their academic journals. And then we have a national research fund introduced to encourage cutting-edge research. And this is open, for any individual lecturer or researcher to apply. Now, that research fund has been increasing from an initial 2 billion naira in 2012 to an additional 5 billion in 2019. And in 2020, TET Fund provided a further 7.5 billion for national research. Now, the guidelines to access the National Research Fund of TET Fund can be found on the TET Fund website. I have some little data as to how we have how that fund has gone over the years. From 2012 to 2019, about 7 billion has been approved and paid out to various researchers. The number of approved proposals, I've stated them on that table. In 2019, 128 proposals were funded by TET Fund. Most of those funded were in the area of science, technology, and innovation category, and we can see the number of proposals. So as we speak, TET Fund is taking the lead in institutionalizing research as a developmental strategy for Nigeria by proposing the introduction of a National Research and Development Foundation. There was a committee that was set up September last year by the fund, by TET Fund, and it's based on the triple helix model, where there's a tripartite stakeholding in research, conception, delivery, and utilization of outcomes. This is a popular model, I'm sure we're all familiar with, but the fund is pushing in that direction, and the committee particularly is at work now trying to set up the proposal to government to approve, giving them all the reasons why Nigeria ought to have such a foundation. In his key address, the Executive Secretary noted that the institutionalization of R&D through problem-solving research and partnership with the industry is an inescapable catalyst for Nigeria's quest to become a more competitive knowledge economy. For far too long, there has been a clear and disturbing disconnect between academia and the industry in Nigeria. And so this move, we believe, is going to address that. Another thing that the fund is also getting into to enhance education and research ecosystem in Nigeria is the establishment of centers of excellence in selected universities across Nigeria. For this year, 12 billion has been approved by the federal government for 12 public universities at 2 billion naira each, 2 universities in each of Nigeria's 6 political zones. I have the list right here, and the various areas of their focus. We have the various universities, and we have 12 of them with various areas of specialization or focus for the centers of excellence. So the objectives of these centers of excellence is to support strategic and applications-oriented research and expertise with potential for industrial applications for national and global competitiveness. The centers will conduct researches for development in strategic and applied sciences with the aim of generating solutions to national problems. So the centers will work towards making tertiary educational institutions more responsive to industry needs and enhance utilization of scientific research by industry, as well as the development of knowledge management platforms and innovation hubs. So with these three policy initiatives, first, the revitalization of R&D in our tertiary institutions, covering the with those three interventions: the institution-based research, the journal support, and the NRF, and then now the proposal to set up the National Research and Development Foundation, and then the establishment of the Centers of Excellence, for which money has actually already been set aside. The future of education and research in Nigeria is primed for accelerated national development. I believe so. In conclusion, in Nigeria, the participation of the private sector, consisting of individuals, industries, and entrepreneurs in funding of education and research, as obtained in other countries, still needs to be galvanized. This is where the proposed NRDF will come into play, because the foundation will serve as an umbrella body that will bring together the triple helix components in a symbiotic and mutually beneficial relationship. I also believe that there should be a firm commitment as to the percentage of national budget to be dedicated to education. We looked at, we're still talking about 5, 6, less than 10%. So I think, as some countries have done, backing up by law, that not less than 10% of the budget should be given to education in any given year will also be a good idea. Tuition fees at the tertiary level is something that Nigeria has, gone in and out of. The arguments are there, and before you know it, there's a lot of resistance. But I think it's something we cannot shy away from, because if primary education can be free or by international standards, that cannot be the same, said to be the same for the tertiary level. And so I'm thinking that at least 50% of the cost of funding education at the tertiary level should be borne by private individuals. The private sector contribution could also be galvanized through the use of tax-deductible research grants. Companies such as pharmaceuticals, power generating, energy, agricultural, food processing companies should be required to commit maybe half percent to 1% of their turnover as research grants to the proposed foundation. Such grants will be tax deductible. Creation of economic and technological clusters around the newly introduced TET Fund Centers of Excellence. Startup companies and commercialization of products of research will be key objectives of the centers. In view of the widely acclaimed success of the TET Fund model, we have suggested to government that there should be an upward revision of the education tax from 2% to 3%, particularly since TET Fund is being left to cater for most of the capital needs of the institutions. Finally, I think this is my last slide. All over the world, education is an expensive venture. Funding of education, and particularly research in Nigeria, is still a far cry from what it ought to be. It is only imperative that government resort to alternative or supplementary sources of revenue for its educational objectives. This paper discussed several policy options which can be devised or emulated from successful models from around the world in order to address the enormous challenges of the sector. A substantial involvement of the private sector funding is imperative. Government alone cannot do it. And so there is need for a multi-level, multi-actor funding arrangement for the sector, backed by adequate institutional and regulatory frameworks. So that's my take concerning funding of education and research in Nigeria. I hope I've enlightened us a little bit as to what TET Fund is doing and what TET Fund has to offer. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Lutu. This was actually a wonderful way to start this session. I was not familiar with TET Fund, and it seems as though you're doing quite a bit to look within Nigeria to come up with innovative ways to actually fund research. So this is a wonderful, wonderful start for the presentation. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to, at this point, we're going to give people an opportunity to ask questions of Dr. Lutu. So if you have a question, I would encourage you to just raise your hand so we could recognize a few questions in real time at this point. Anyone? Just go ahead and raise your hands if you have a question. But while we wait for people to give questions, I'm actually curious. You talked about a lot of very concrete ways in which you believe that Nigeria can better support research at the tertiary level. And so is TET Fund, in addition to all of the innovative projects that you've initiated, are you part of, or is there another group responsible for sort of lobbying or trying to ensure that these ideas are put on the agenda of particularly legislatures?
Oh, yes. Like I referred to last year in September, the fund put together a group of academics and set up a research and development standing committee. And as we speak, that committee is at work, putting together the paperwork, and the lobbying has started. The fund has reached out to the National Assembly, and the Federal Ministry of Education as well is on board on that committee. And so at the end of the day, it's within this year, we are hopeful that such a foundation will receive the legislative support that we require.
Okay, and I know that we actually in the audience, we have some people who are actually engaged in research, some university students who are engaged in research. What would you think would be an avenue for them to get involved? Because a lot of times, some of these changes don't come until there's a lot of grassroots activism to really push for the changes that we'd like to see. So maybe Owen can chime in here to see what has been done or what could be done on sort of that student level.
Well, yeah, there is a lot that is sort of being done. Particularly, I can only speak for Eko-Konnect. One of the things that we do as part of our activities is to really grow and empower students, particularly girls, and make them understand that they are very important to the social and technological development of the country. So we're involved in a lot of campaigns and activities through our internship programs and projects that we do, which are, we generally try to recruit young students from universities, postgraduates to embark on a lot of our project activities. So we have that kind of grassroots support. And then we try to then take those projects into the sphere of government, like TET Fund. A particular project I can talk about is we had this project where we got girls in ICT and women in Wakren to embark on a project of using Raspberry Pi devices and Python programming to build weather stations, which they did a couple of years ago. And what we wanted to do was to build a network of weather stations using our links in terms of the research and education network. So we could have these weather stations in all the university campuses. We're trying to take that project into NIMET. NIMET is kind of like the Nigerian meteorological body for Nigeria, to sort of take on that project and add, funding to that project. And so that's one of the ways where we're actually trying to get students involved and highlight projects and highlight the research and education network to the likes of the TET Funds and the other bigger organizations. So that's what we're doing. I want to just sort of quickly ask Dr. Lotu a quick question. There's one question from somebody who's anonymous, who was asking, in terms of the funding that's already been done for different organizations, is there some kind of repository that TET Fund has where one can kind of look at how, what the funding projects are, who was funded, what's been the impact of that? And because it's an area where Eko-Konnect is very interested in building a national repository. And part of what we would like to be able to have in those kind of repositories is this kind of information about projects that have been funded by TET Fund, what they were about, and also some kind of analysis of the impact that has had. And then the other question I would want to ask comes from the session we had in the morning, where Dr. Lutu, you mentioned some of the other funders like NCC. Now, somebody asked from a university of Sokoto, as universities are going back to a reopening, and the fact that they're having to do a lot of teaching and learning online, this lecturer was saying students are going to be spending a portion of their time off campus as well. And so is there any way that they can be helped in terms of being able to access infrastructure, with their mobile devices because of the cost of data? And, the idea of zero-rated websites for students where they could use their devices to access infrastructure, not pay much, came up. So my question to you, Dr. Lutu, as well, is, are those kind of considerations in the pipeline? And does TET Fund collaborate with the other organizations like NCC to provide those kind of grants or that kind of funding?
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Owen. Yes, we do have a lot of documentation as to, the interventions of the fund over the years. Only last year we commissioned an impact assessment, and I think they must have or are in the process of publishing, their findings. But even within the fund, we have loads and loads of documentation, information as to, what we have provided, the monies we've, given to each university, what we funded. And you can also check on our website. I think we have, it's a lot of documentation as to the major fundings that we have been involved in, complete with pictures, of such buildings, equipment that have been bought. And if you go across Nigeria, of course, I'm sure you testify, because we have this policy of making sure they are well branded with TET Fund insignias on them, and so that way, you can't miss them. But we do have such documentation. And then as to coming in the area of providing some kind of a support for data for the students, if I get the last question. Unfortunately, TET Fund is bounded by the Act, the mandates, like I showed in my presentation, and we don't sort of intervene in anything that is not a capital expense. If it's an overhead and a consumable sort of item, the fund, the Act does not allow us to intervene in such. But in terms of collaboration with other organizations, such as I listed, the foundation that we are proposing is going to be a very good platform for us to be able to, sort of reach out and have a kind of synergy among the funding efforts of these various organizations and ourselves.
All right, thank you so much. We actually have a participant with a raised hand. The last name is Inato. If you would unmute and pose your question, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Olutu, for the presentation. Just a quick one. I just wanted to know if
Introduce yourself, sir.
Sorry?
Could you introduce yourself, sir, before you ask your question?
Oh, okay, yeah, okay, thank you. My name is Professor Inato from University of Benin. I was in the morning section. I did introduce myself that time. So, yeah, thank you, Dr. Lutu, for the beautiful presentation. Just a quick one. I wanted to know if there's a kind of funding support for students who might be interested in kind of innovation, right? Like you see in most universities overseas, you have innovation hub and incubation centers where young students can innovate, and they are able to create some SMEs from that. If you have any of such thing within the TET Fund funding portfolio, perhaps maybe you can administer that through their supervisor or something like that.
Well, again, like I said, for Owen's question, the modus operandi of the fund is very well spelled out. Our beneficiaries are the universities, polytechnics, colleges of education, and all our interventions are through channeled through the university itself. We don't have any direct, contact with either the students or even the lecturers that we support. All our funding goes through the university, and for those specific intervention lines that we already have laid out. So I don't know. I don't quite get what I wasn't hearing him properly, but I don't quite get what he really wants.
Yeah, I asked if, for example, the TET Fund will want to encourage the young, bright minds to innovate even while they are still students, right? So that they can actually create some kind of innovation hub, and they can really direct their talents and energy toward creating local solutions for local problems.
Okay. Okay. No, that we have been doing entrepreneurship interventions for years, which um, we have for the polytechnics and for the universities particularly some form of support towards entrepreneurship, but it's left to the institution itself to then cascade that down to the maybe the students that's the kind of students that you have identified. But I believe that window is there for such students.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Lutu. We really appreciate you taking the time. If you have additional questions for Dr. Lutu, please leave them in the chat. We will get to them, but we do need to move on to our next presenter, who is Ms. Leigh Ann Jones. Ms. Jones has been working at the intersection of international development and research and innovation at the UK's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. For the last 10 years, she received the Bachelor of Science and Bachelor of Economics at the Australian National University. She relocated to London, where she spent 10 years designing and managing innovative climate policies and programs in different parts of the UK government and in the international consultancies. In 2014, while working for DFID, she completed a Master's in Innovation and Sustainability for International Development at Sussex University. Since October of 2019, Leigh Ann has been based in Lagos, leading a new team in the British Deputy High Commission to boost partnerships with West African countries on science, technology, and innovation. Looking forward to her presentation. Welcome, Ms. Leigh Ann Jones.
Thank you, and good morning or afternoon, wherever people are in the world. So I'm going to, can you imagine, I've spent the whole of 2020 and I haven't once had to upload a presentation onto Zoom. In the UK government, we use Teams, Microsoft Teams. So, so just bear with me if I could see if I can make this work. Otherwise, we have a backup plan, which is, I think, Owen and the team have the presentation. So if I'll just make it a full screen. Or a thumbs up. Can anyone see? Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I'll move on. So thank you for having me at this session. I was actually in person, lucky enough to be at the Eko-Konnect meeting this time last year, in person in Lagos. So it's great to be back and with the participants today. Just so you know a bit around me and my team. So we're quite a new team. As Donna mentioned, we've been set up since October 2019, so just over a year now, and part of the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. So used to be a part of the DFID, the Department for International Development from the UK. Obviously, that has been merged in the last 6 months or so with our diplomacy side. So we bring together our development and diplomacy under FCDO now. So I've got a team of, there's now 4 of us in the team, and we cover West Africa. And our main objectives across the team is to support research capacity strengthening and ecosystem strengthening for innovation. So really looking at innovation, ecosystem level interventions and support with West African countries and partners for both research and innovation. Now, obviously, there's many areas where those overlap and they're not as clear-cut and distinct. So we have combined those into one sort of overarching objective. Other areas of objectives for us is to support our partners in country to understand the UK funding landscape. So it's great to be able to present this to everybody today, just to give you an insight into how we're structured, but also the complexities around that. So we're not there yet in terms of coherent sort of strategy and way of accessing UK funding. It's a work in progress, but we're getting there. And of course, any feedback that you have as researchers trying to access our support, then that's really welcome. So just to start, this is a demonstration of that complex landscape. So the UK spent, or was on target, let's say, to spend in 2021, 1.2 billion a year, so annual target pounds on development research. That's our ODA spend, overseas development assistance. Clearly, we've had some challenges within the UK with our finances and our economy, so that budget has actually decreased. And I can't say off the top of my head exactly what we're on target to spend in 2021. But the good news is that over the last 5 years, that's been on an increase. So that's basically doubled over the last 5 years. And what that increase looks like is a huge number of UK institutions that are now funding development research across, our development partners. There's a list or a bit of a picture of the different types of institutions here. Foreign and Commonwealth and Development Office, so previously DFID, now part of our diplomacy, and then a range you might recognize organizations such as GCRF, the Global Challenges Research Fund, which is led out of our Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and a number of our councils and Royal Academies. So there's a whole range of thematic areas as well that are important to UK funding in terms of research. So I'll move on. This is just a snapshot of what the big buckets of funding look like. So again, some of these figures might be slightly out of date, but let's just say in an ideal world, this is where we're heading for. So on the 2 big spenders in terms of UK investment for development research is really from what was ex-DFID, but now FCDO. And that's quite a large research team. So we're called the Research and Evidence Department, and there's a whole range of thematic areas in there. So there's teams working on agriculture, on climate change, on governance, security, conflict, humanitarian, economic growth, health, education. I think I've got all of the teams. So in that 1.5 billion, it's a whole range of different thematic areas. Similarly for the Global Challenges Research Fund, so the GCRF, it's a fund, but there are individual projects and programs and calls for proposals within that, and a whole range of different thematic areas. The Newton Fund, it's not existing in Nigeria. In Africa, it's in Kenya and South Africa. So it's really supporting partnership with some emerging economies. We could say that, you know, in the next round of Newton funding, we should be bidding for a Nigeria partnership. Then another big chunk of our support comes from our Department of Health and Social Care, ultimately under the National Institute for Health Research and the Global Health Research Fund. The small percentage comes from another government department, DEFRA, so the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. Not all of this is research, some of it's program spend specifically in implementation, but a big chunk of that is our research projects. So in terms of our investment in Nigeria, so in the UK, we have an organization called UKCDR, so the UK Consultative for Development Research. It's basically a secretariat that covers all of the development UKCDR back in, I think this was in December 2019, this is publicly available, did a study for us to look at what that footprint is in Nigeria. What is the UK investment in terms of development research in Nigeria? It's important to mention this is public funding, but it's also Wellcome Trust. So the Wellcome Trust, not a public funder, but a big investor from the UK side and is a partner on UKCDR. So their data has been pulled into this, which might give in some reason why it's skewed a little bit to the health side. The Wellcome Trust is a big funder of development research for health. So the key highlights, I would say, is that particularly if you look at point 5 here in terms of the UK's, how the UK sits comparing to other bilateral public funders, we're the biggest public funder of development research within Nigeria. But on the flip side, that's only a small percentage of the UK's total budget of development research. So we spend quite a lot of money on development research, that 1.2 billion per year, 2021. Small fraction of that goes to Nigeria. So there's a huge opportunity for us to build better partnerships. You know, why is the UK not funding more projects in Nigeria? What is the challenges there, and how do we and my team support access for Nigerian researchers to UK funding? The other thing to mention, now this isn't on in this report, there was another report that UKCDR did around the same time that looked across Africa on fellowships and scholarship awards. It didn't specifically look at individual countries so much, but one of the findings is that Nigeria receives more UK fellowship and scholarship awards than any other African country. So again, there's a huge opportunity to explore there. We've obviously got great connections, historical connections, but also, you know, ongoing engagements with researchers, early career researchers. And so, you know, how do we make the most of that? In that report, what they do find is most of those focus predominantly on masters. So again, there's a space there or an opportunity to think, how do we provide more PhD support, essentially, or how do we encourage more PhDs to engage with our scholarships and fellowship awards? So again, on a down point, so I mentioned only 3% of the UK's development research is spent in Nigeria. So again, huge opportunity to increase that. but on a sad news, and this compares relatively, it does compare across similarly across some of the other key countries that we've looked at, notably Kenya and South Africa. Only 15% of UK funded projects in Nigeria, research projects that the UK funds that's looking at Nigeria, is co-authored with a Nigerian research institution. So that's a scary figure for us. That's quite, that's a shock, and we're not proud of that, but that's something that we can see, we can work towards. How do we improve that number over the next few years? So we've done another follow-up study, and this is specifically looking at the research ecosystem. So again, this was published last year, I think around June, July last year. And I can share all the links to these documents for people, but it was a very specific study that looked at, it did a needs assessment essentially in 7 African countries around their research ecosystem and what are the challenges and needs around capacity strengthening. Nigeria was one of those countries, and we've got a publication. There's also a very quick, 1-pager infographic and other neat things to just pull the key findings from there. It's a really detailed report. So the findings that I have here are, just scratching the surface. So please, I recommend everyone to get into that. And I'd love to hear feedback. We'd love to know if some of these findings resonate. So some of the key findings was looking at the policy landscape for a start. So Nigeria has a well-developed science, tech, and innovation policy with ambitious targets, but the implementation is challenging. And some of that is due to complex government systems. So challenges between who's in charge of what, federal, state, local, and then different ministries. Next, around research production. So some of the findings of the report, the large number of universities, but low number of researchers per population, and only 1/3 of the researchers have PhDs. So that's something, again, that resonates with some of the findings around what are the types of scholarships and fellowships the UK is funding. And then access to national funding, often limited to public universities. And I think there was a question in the chat bar around how do private institutions access TET Fund. I think from last year, we had Professor Bamiro as part of one of the panels who mentioned there is an interest around how to open up TET Fund more to private institutions, certainly through partnership at least with public institutions.
Hi, Leanne. Hello, Leanne. Hi, Leanne.
Yes.
Right, your connection.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you now, but your connection went a little bit wonky for a few seconds. But if you can just retrace back a few sentences, I think you're fully back now.
Okay, great. Apologies. I did mention to Owen that there was a risk my connection might not hold. So if it doesn't, and worst comes to worst, I'll have to just switch connections, but let's run with it now. So the final, I just mentioned on the access to national funding limited to public universities. So I think, there was a question in the sidebar around this specifically for TET Fund. So it would be great if Dr. Aluoto can talk a little bit about how that's progressing, if there's opportunities for private institutions to access TET funding. And then a low contribution from international funding.
So we are having the audio problem again. Would you, yes. So the audio problem is persisting. Would it be, you said that it would be possible for you to change connections. Would you like to try that? Can you hear me?
Sure. Should I stop my video?
Okay, yes, you can stop and see if you can change for a second. You have another connection available?
Yes, I do. It might just take me a little while. I've just stopped my video. I wonder if that's helpful.
Oh, yes, actually, yes, you can continue. This is very clear now.
Okay, good. Let's go with it. Okay, so the final thing was around research diffusion. And I think we've mentioned already from Dr. Olotu around the limited connections between university and the private sector, university and industry. So how that is restricting the opportunity for research diffusion in Nigeria. But there is a trend towards increasing international research collaboration. So a good sign there. Finally, just really briefly on the from the report talk about strengthening national research funding capacity, and specifically that for all research institutions. So not just limiting to public funding institutions, but also private universities, as well as research institutions themselves that aren't universities. And number two, looking at strengthening research support, research capacity management in particular, in a number of universities. And I know this is very close to the heart of Eko-Konnect team. And finally, support the development of mechanisms for research quality evaluation and including national research priorities. So one of the assessments in the report was there's no really straightforward go-to document for national research priorities. There are a number of different priorities, but how they align to the government's development goals and development objectives, or the economic sustainability plan, or all those things, pulling that together into and agreed across Nigeria, this is what our research priorities are. Let me move on. So just briefly on some of the relevant UK programs and activities that we've gone existing to address some of these challenges, but also to support partnership. So most of these are through Pan-African institutions. So we have sort of organizational level partnerships with the organizations such as the African Academy of Sciences and their programs, such as Delta's looking at African science leadership, REMPRO looking at research management, also with Aurora, the African Research Universities Alliance. And the other one worth mentioning is the Science Granting Councils Initiative, which is a group of, I think, 15 at last count, science granting councils, so national institutes for granting research funding across Africa. And we had been talking to TET Fund to secure their application into the SGCI. It's a really great initiative and a network of science granting councils across the continent to engage and learn lessons around whether it's new and emerging policies such as open access or looking at research management. So I think that process got stalled a little bit with COVID, but it'd be great to pick that up again. I think that would be really useful for Nigerian research ecosystem. And the final area, just depending on where we land with our own budgets and our own politics internally, there is a new program that we've begun to explore looking at strengthening research capacity. And that's really where drawing on those lessons from that report and actually putting them into implementation and implementing projects. I thought I'd just mention for our UK-Nigeria country strategy, it's still in development at the moment, hopefully to be completed by March and signed off. But these are some of the key focus areas that the UK within Nigeria, the office within Nigeria would be likely to focus on. So human development, economic growth, governance and stability, and climate change, probably the top ones, but that's just a few. There's other areas as well. And very finally is some of the links to websites to where to look for UK funding opportunities. What we're trying to do as part of our sort of UK government coherence is pull all this together into one website. And so one point of access, which I'll send the link through. But until that time, these are some areas where links that people can follow. It's also worthwhile following our Twitter handle. So at FCDO Research, there's a lot of the calls for proposals come out through that network. And also you see some of the research outputs. We've got a, Owen was mentioning that desire to have a sort of research repository for Nigeria. We have that certainly for our sort of differed side of the house. We're building that for other government departments, but it's called Research for Development. I'll send the link through in the chat as well. So you can actually access what research outputs have been completed. So reports, assessments, articles that we've actually funded already with our funding. I think that is, yeah, that's it. So hopefully you caught the rest of that without too many problems.
Yeah. No, that was actually quite clear. Thank you, Leanne. And thanks so much for giving us the links. I was wondering if you actually have a direct link to the report you mentioned, assessing the needs of the research system in Nigeria. Was that link actually there? If not, it was included?
I didn't put it in the slide. I'll just put it in the chat bar and then we'll send it through as well. So Owen can send it to all the participants later.
Okay, I really appreciate that. Very, very insightful. I know a number of people are looking to see what are research opportunities out there, and that overview was very, very helpful. We have time for probably just 2 questions live. So if there's anyone who would like to pose a live question, please raise your hand at this time. And if not, you could go ahead and leave a question in the chat, and we'll address those as soon as possible. So is there anyone interested in a live question? Okay. Yes. Let me see. I don't see any hands up, so I think we can actually move on to our final speaker. Well, not our final, to Tom Fryer at this time. So let me just introduce him briefly. Tom Fryer, as a member of GEONT, he joined GEONT as a member of the International Relations team in 2008. He has been in his current role as the head of international relations since March 2019, leading a team of 5 that supports GEONT's relationship with R&E networking partners in other world regions and manages the EU-funded regional development projects, including the Eko-Konnect 3 project, and supports the R&E networking across the African continent. So it is a pleasure to have you, and looking forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Oti. Thank you for the presentation. And Owen, thank you very much, and Eko-Konnect. Thank you for the invitation to participate in this session. I'll try sharing my screen. And if you could inform me, are you seeing my presenter view or are you seeing the viewer view?
I'm seeing the presenter view. So You're
seeing the presenter view. So I just got to check where I can change that. It's one of these buttons here. There. Has that switched it for you?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Excellent, great. Okay, so I mean, we've been hearing some very interesting talks about funding for research specifically, research activities specifically. I'd like to take a bit of a different tack, if I may, and sort of look at the aspect relating to the sustainability of the NREN, because in the context of the research activities and education, so many of these activities nowadays are global. They may be, country to country within a region. They may be between 2 world regions. They may be between multiple or involve multiple world regions. So the element that the NREN plays and the regional networks play in supporting that, and the fact that institutions and research projects need to take into consideration when they're looking at how they're funding everything they're doing, that they need to make sure that they can get the services from their NRENs that enable them to implement their projects is an important thing to be taken into account. So I'd like to start with just a little bit of scene setting, and which relates to Eko-Konnect in general. So one of the problems, of course, is that there is a significant digital divide. This is something I joined, as we heard, in 2008, and the word digital divide has been at the heart of so much of the work I've been involved in, and it doesn't go away. In terms of Africa, according to UNESCO, Africa only contributes to 2% of the world's research output, despite being home to something like 15% of the world's population. internet penetration on the African continent is only at 2/3 of the level that it is in the rest of the world. The number of researchers per capita in Africa is just 2.5%, sorry, of that in North America and Western Europe. Investment in tech lags significantly compared with other world regions. However, despite the limited access to reliable and affordable connectivity today, Africa does have a significant youth dividend, which if we can harness, it will have significant benefits for the continent. But if it isn't harnessed and opportunities are provided for youth, this may lead to significant challenges in the years to come. Reflecting a little bit more on the digital divide, some statistics that really make it very clear. What we see here is the price of connectivity as a percentage of gross national income per capita in Europe. And what we're seeing in this graph is the vast majority of countries are below the 2% mark and many are below the 1% mark. Now let's move to Africa. And here we see a very different picture. The vast majority of countries now, no one is below that 2% mark. The lowest is around the 3 to 4% mark, and this swiftly increases to 10%, 20%, and continues to rise. For Nigeria, we're looking at about 25%. So in conclusion, we see a serious issue which can only also have an impact for research and education. And this is one of the raison d'etre of the Eko-Konnect projects, which started back in 2011, and we're now in our third iteration. There's a focus now in Eko-Konnect 3 on continuing to provide international connectivity for research and education networks, but also to developing access to cloud services, providing training and capacity building, and providing events that bring the community together. And the aim is to provide a strong ecosystem within the region and interconnected with the rest of the world that can help support research and education in Western Central Africa and the rest of the continent. And another thing that's important to note is that whilst the European Union provides significant funding, co-funding is required in order to keep, in order to enable the expenditure of the European funding. And this is traditionally provided by the national network members of the regional organizations themselves, but alternative sources are of course possible. And of course, so this is part of the element that we need to keep in the back of our minds when we're looking at the institutions and how they're able to support, or other funding mechanisms they're able to support the NRENs in order to provide this co-funding, which enables infrastructure that then enables that collaboration within those research projects. Here, what we see is a picture of where research education networks exist around the world and how they're connected into Europe in this particular map. So across the globe, in total, there are some 130 national networks. These provide connectivity and other services to research and education networks in the country. And then, excepting in the USA and Canada, these national networks are then connected to a regional network, in the instance of Western Central Africa, WACREN, that enables collaboration within that region. Then by each of those regional networks connecting together, you get the global ability to collaborate. And today you've got about 100 countries out of those 130 within NREN that are all connected together. But I think one of the important things to emphasize with this map is it's not just about connectivity. Really, this map also represents a human network of people that work at NRENs and research and regional networks that work together in a global ecosystem to support R&E collaboration. And it's not just with that connectivity, it's other services such as Eduroam, which I think is well known within Nigeria, and many other services, trust and identity, security, collaboration tools and services. For the funding of NREMs themselves, there is not one single model. In some countries, it is the institutions, member institutions that fund the NREN. In others, they are government funded. And in others, yet still, there is a hybrid model. At the regional level, then, obviously the regional network needs to be funded. And that will very often typically be done by membership fees for the NRENs that are members of the organization, and potentially also with a cost share model that looks at the cost of delivering the services shared equitably on a basis that maybe looks at GDP, maybe looks at population, maybe looks at uptake of services. And then, of course, projects such as Africa-Connect 3 and other funding opportunities contribute to ensuring sustainability. So it's important when we're looking at funding research and education at institutions that we keep in mind that in order to keep our academics and students being able to do their work effectively, we need to bear in mind that the NREN needs to be funded in such a way that it can be effective, and that the NRENs are able to fund the regional network so that it can benefit its regions, the NRENs in its region. But why have this model? Well, the idea is that by working together, this system leads to collaborative efforts, as I've mentioned, this sort of global family almost of people that work at these NRENs that bring concrete benefits for our communities. And I'll just give one example that's shown how working in this way, we've had a significant impact on connectivity pricing within Africa through Africa-Connect and its sister related project, EU Med-Connect. So you can see here that this is it takes figures going back throughout the beginnings in 2010, even in the case of Algeria, back to 2003. The massive capacity growth that we've had and the massive drop in prices per megabit per second. And this has been achieved by having sufficient funding in one procurement effort so that we act as a joint buying club. We all come together, put our funding together, act as a joint buying club, and then the suppliers see us as a more valuable customer, and as a result we have better pricing and increased capacities. Challenges often remain, and certainly no promises that similar results in all locations will come about. They aren't easy to achieve, but this does demonstrate what is feasible. And of course, if you do get those savings, it means that the resources that the institutions and governments are putting into the NRENs can be diverted to providing other solutions to improve the ability of research education. And one thing I'd like to emphasize for the institutions that are listening today is that, NRENs are not ISPs. We're not internet service providers. Typically, we're one of their customers effectively. We are not-for-profit organizations that aim to support RNA in many ways, not just through cost-effective bandwidth, but through other services. And so just take a quick look at that, the value proposition of the NREN. One of them I've already mentioned is connectivity, and in places like Africa, that is still very much an issue. You may hear conversations in Europe and North America where connectivity is not so much the issue today because the commercials are providing better and better connectivity. But in many places of the world, connectivity still is a key issue. You've got trust and identity. So we were talking earlier in some of the questions about the idea of open access. Well, trust and identity services are one of those elements that can enable open access because they are what enable you to access the data that you want to be able to access. Collaboration tools, web conferencing platforms. We're on Zoom today. There's a community provided service called EduMeet. Cloud services being procured by NRENs and regional networks. Security tools which make sure that attacks on institutions are mitigated against. And user support with the idea of the NREN and the regional networks working together to engage with their user communities to make sure that their solutions are being met. And then community, conference, bringing our communities together through events like this week's Eko-Konnect, WACREN's conference, etc. So what is it that stands in the way of NRENs and the regional networks? Well, monopolies can mean limited service offerings, as well as inflated prices. There's no competition. It may be difficult to get acceptable terms in connectivity contracts, or ensuring the timely delivery of a service under a contract is difficult, and you have little recourse because as a monopoly, if they don't deliver, you can't go out and re-procure and get the service from someone else. Equally, if we see if there is limited support nationally, then longer term sustainability is difficult to achieve, which has an impact on the researchers at the institutions in being able to do their work properly. ISPs may not want to make offers to NRENs because they perceive them as a threat rather than the opportunity that we present. And of course, limited funding is an issue. In the past year, we've seen, with COVID-19, that has had an impact on national budgets. That's had an impact on NRENs. It's also had an impact on institutions in the budgets that they get being able to support their NRENs. So, this funding issue is an eternal one so far. It would be great if we could one day not need to talk about that, but I don't think we're going to get there. So what can we do about this? Well, I think that Africa-Connect 3 is doing various things that are relevant for national networks as well in ideas that they can take up. We're focusing on strengthening human resource capacities and expertise at various levels. At the regional level, the partners, WACREN, Ubuntu Net Alliance, ASREN, GÉANT are working to strengthen governance and systems, develop and implement sustainability plans. So having good governance, the engagement of your members. So if this on the regional basis, the NREN's being closely involved in the governance and the way that the regional network is working, and at the national level, that the institutions have buy-in and are working closely with the NREN to make sure they're getting out of the NREN what they need to support their researchers. Put in sustainability plans that take into account the local environment, the opportunities and the challenges. These should help. Projects and the regional partners, we're encouraging the sharing of ideas and best practices amongst NREN, so working together as a community, strengthening technical skills through training in specific areas as well. And finally, we've already heard the mention of women in NRENs and in STEM in general, which WACREN is delivering a strong program on. So these elements aid in adding strengthening, in strengthening the NREN as an institution and increasing its value proposition. But it still doesn't solve that sustainability issue. So what we really need to do is make sure that we're constantly raising awareness of the importance of the NREN and the regional network to the relevant stakeholders. This includes institutions, but it includes governments, ministries, regulators, etc. So in Africa-Connect 3, we've set up an activity called donor engagement and advocacy and donor engagement. And we're using this to raise that awareness amongst the relevant stakeholders and at the same time look for funding that in the first instance can support the co-funding needed for Africa-Connect 3, which I mentioned earlier on. But thinking on a much higher level, really, Africa-Connect 3 is a means to an end. The end really has to be the ongoing presence of the NRENs and the regional networks. So any opportunities there that can help build that sustainability, be it at the national level or the regional level, is something important for us to focus on. This work, admittedly, is not simple at all. We're still on a learning path. It's an activity we began a year ago, but we know that there can be success. Some NRENs have been successful in securing funding with international funding agencies. For instance, Somalia and Malawi have acquired funding from the World Bank. And these funding agreements are often agreed with the government. So it goes back to this point of not just having engagement with the government in terms of making sure that they're able to support the general environment for the NREN, but in specific instances as well, that they can help obtain funding if it's not from state funding. So a close relationship between the NREN and the institutions is also essential. Conferences, as I've said, such as Eko-Connect, I think for this are essential. But the NRENs need to engage directly with the user communities, involving national and sometimes the regional networks. There are communities, research communities we need to engage with directly, such as AfriGeo, where it's not just the national networks and regional networks are engaged, but also networks in other parts of the world, because in many instances these are global activities. And of course, we need the proper visibility and dissemination. And again, this is where institutions come in. We've really got to be able to tell our stakeholders, and within the institutions, the people that are doing the research need to be able to tell the story to their bean counters. This is why we need to be supporting, as an institution, the NREN, and not going out to get an ISP connectivity that just gives us connectivity, doesn't give us the rest of the package. We need to demonstrate the impact. It's not just saying they give us this service, that service, and the other service. It's saying by having these services, this is the difference that we get. And this is the social human impact that there is in this activity that we're doing that is supported by the NREN. We need a portfolio of materials on this. The institutions need that, the NRENs need that, the regional networks need that. Effectively an advocacy kit that we can go out and speak to our relevant stakeholders and say, this is why you've got to support us. And again, this can also come and tie into institutions when applying for funding, that you can demonstrate your successes in the past as well. So just looking a little bit at potential funding opportunities. You may well have heard, the European Commission, the new European Commission, is placing very strong emphasis on relations with Africa. And I think that we will see many opportunities coming out of the result. Of course, there is already Horizon 2020 in place. There's Horizon Europe coming up. There are funding opportunities for collaboration, research collaborations in there. There is the Digital for Development Hub, which is being launched. There is the Marie Skłodowska-Curie Actions Program as well. I've included the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I understand that MasterCard Foundation also is based in Nigeria and has support action. So there are, in the previous two presentations, we've heard of lots of other opportunities. So one of the questions that I may throw out there again is, there are all of these opportunities, and different entities and people are aware of different opportunities. How do we bring that information together so that it's available for the institutions, for the researchers to be able to come together and not be having to spend their valuable research time on researching where to get the funding to do their research? Is there a way that we can work together on that? And it's not just being aware of what the funding is, but it's more information about that. What are the funding cycles? When is it that you've got to be going and looking at this particular funding opportunity? When is it you've got to be going and looking at the other one? So this is then my closing slide. It's a standard Africa-Connect 3 closing slide, but I think it really sets out something that is really important. It's that repetition of the word shared. There's shared responsibility here amongst institutions, national networks and regional networks to make sure that we're closely integrated, working together so that we're able to create a more sustainable environment or ecosystem that enables researchers to work together better and better, more effectively at the national, regional, and global level. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that presentation as well. I really love the closing and the opportunities you see for collaborations in terms of understanding funding cycles and what is necessary to enable to procure more funding for projects. But I'm also interested, but I also think too, there may be also opportunities. I noticed that Dr. Luchu, she talked about TET Fund and the need to advocate for greater resource dollars from the national budget. So it seems as though both of you could benefit from sort of some kind of advocacy lobbying to influence how NRENs are going to be funded. Because again, as you mentioned before, it really needs to be funded internally for longevity. So I wonder if there would be some opportunities for funds, maybe from at least a discussion between TET Fund and what Africa-Connect 3 to see if there are any opportunities to come up with a funding model that could help, and then also influence legislators to understand the importance of increasing the educational budget. There's another thing that you said that I found quite interesting, and I've heard similar numbers before, the idea that 2% of research output comes from Africa. I mean, it's the number, it's concerning. But then when I also look at it, because of the research infrastructure within Africa, a lot of the most talented researchers aren't necessarily doing research within Africa, they're doing research globally. So I just wonder if there's a measure to help us to understand what % of research is produced using African talent that's not necessarily coming out of institutions that are housed within Africa. So that would be an interesting metric Leanne is smiling, so maybe she knows a little bit more about that.
Very interesting point, Donna. That's a very interesting point. Now, to go back to the what you were talking about with the collaborations, I too would be particularly interested in throwing that question to our panelists. We've identified one of the, we've looked at these presentations and I'm like, wow, there seems to be all of this funding, and I'm sure that the audience are going to be saying, well, where is it? Because it seems that there's so much funding opportunities everywhere. But we'll obviously ask the audience. We don't really seem to see where it is. And I do like what Tom said, that we do need to try to aggregate this information in a way that it's accessible. We can understand what the funding cycles are, what the process is for applying for the funds, what the skill sets required are to even apply for those funds. And also, I think somebody did mention maybe even some policy changes might even need to be looked at to sort of encourage research output in Nigeria. Dr. Lotu mentioned about the way TET Fund mandated by a strict policies that they have a mandate as to how funding goes. But in the current, say, COVID situation that we have, say, Dr. Lotu, a lot of the funding that we're saying is capital intensive. Shouldn't that now be reconsidered to look more at technology infrastructure, online infrastructure, some of the points that Tom has made? Shouldn't that be under consideration so that these policies could also be reviewed and looked at with the changing circumstances? Anyway, that's just a point I'd like to have made. And then specifically, Tom talked about the Africa-Connect 3 and this whole issue about counterpart funding to what the European Union can provide. I know that is a very difficult, it's very difficult for NRENs or regional RENs to really come up with the counterpart funding. But, again, that could be some area in which TET Fund could help, where they can bring some of that counterpart funding that is added to what the European Union can provide to just bring more impact to research and more funding. So yes, I'd really be happy if there are ways in which the funders can collaborate as well.
Okay, we do have a few questions that were posed in the question Q&A session that were not directly addressed. The first question was from an anonymous attendee, and the question is the research funded by TET Fund open access? Is there a Nigerian repository where this funded research can be accessed? And I think that you actually did address this question earlier. There's another question from Omo, where he's asking, what does TET Fund see as its role in supporting the R&E community with funds for shared platforms, as it seems the institutions are not able to solve many of their problems on their own? And I think that was what I had in mind when I thought it possibly be an opportunity to collaborate with Africa-Connect 2 to brainstorm on innovative ways in which you can support a platform for sort of shared R&E.
Connect 3 now.
Africa-Connect 3, sorry.
Yes. Africa-Connect.
Africa-Connect.
Let's just call it Africa-Connect.
Africa-Connect, okay, yes. So the question was actually, what does TET Fund see as its role in supporting the research and education community with funds for shared platforms, which the NRENs could be a shared platform, as it sees the institutions are not able to solve many of their problems on their own? So I think connectivity is a problem at universities. Is there something that the TET Fund can do to help with that problem institutional wide? You're muted. You're muted. Look, Dr. Lutu, could you unmute your microphone, please?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yes, interesting questions. The world is changing, obviously, and there's no reason why TET Fund wouldn't change along with the world. But I do need to state that our interventions, we have a line of intervention called ICT intervention. We've been doing that for the past 5 or 6 years. And what we always stipulate what we want that fund to be deployed towards. But basically, it's going to be around ICT infrastructure, not necessarily, the connectivity aspect. I know some people have raised the point of having to help out in this connectivity area, and I believe the board is open to consider that, especially in line with what Owen just spoke about that, and even yourself, Donna, that these networks are beginning to become the thing of the future. And so I believe that a case for connectivity, helping the institutions in the area of connectivity, is an area that TET Fund would definitely look into, because all the time, the beneficiaries are always pushing for this, but we've always said, well, we've provided, the infrastructure, we've provided, the computers, we've provided you the servers, we've laid out the networks, we have a full department of ICT that oversees intervention in ICT in all the institutions. The only thing we don't do is, pay for, data. And we feel, out of your overhead, you should be able to do that. But, the push is on, and I'm sure it's something, especially in the light of research networks like this, like Eko-Konnect. I think it's an area that the board will look at.
Thank you. So I see Leanne is typing a response in the chat, and we have okay, so there was a question in chat as well. What can European Union or GIANT do to encourage operators in African countries to lower the price of connectivity for NRENs?
I think that's probably a question directed at me.
Oh, yes.
happy to take. I mean, first of all, I'd like to clarify a little bit on the relationship. So, GIANT as an organization has been involved in supporting, managing, coordinating the DevCo funded projects. That's one of the branches of the European Commission to help develop the regional networks. Now, one of the things that we do then, working together very much with the local partner, because we've got the sort of European Union, the procurement expertise, but an entity like WACREN has the local knowledge and the local relationship. So first of all, it's very much working closely together. From a European perspective, we can't do this alone. And hopefully we're of benefit as well to WACREN in their procurement, in bringing this forward, procurement activity forward. And I see that Bubak has just joined us. Very good timing. What we can do, I mean, what we've always done, I remember my very first procurement activity that I got involved in, which was in Africa Connect 1, which was looking at the UbuntuNet network in Eastern and Southern Africa. And one of the things that we did, first of all, was sit down with each of the suppliers that had put in an offer. And we clarified exactly what we are, what our purpose is, what our mission is. And, going back to what I was saying in my presentation, that we are not a threat to ISPs. In fact, in many ways, we're an opportunity for them because, we're a customer, we're a long-term customer. And we, you know, by providing decent connectivity in institutions, people at those institutions will then get used to having decent connectivity, will then go out into their professional lives later on and then want to continue having that connectivity, so will become customers. But one of the issues, and I think there's another comment in the chat about this as well, is that, okay, Africa-Connect is limited in itself to international connectivity. It's between country and between world region and world region. And the problems that we see are not just there. There are problems in country, and there are problems on the campus and last mile. And each time you go down that scale, you know, you're multiplying your costs by a factor of 10 at least. So, you know, within Africa-Connect 3, we might be spending 23 or so million on connectivity, but then you bring that down to developing a national network, and you've got a significant amount more to be able to deploy a network within the country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You want to say something, Dr. Oti?
Oh, no.
Okay, I thought you had your hand raised. And then you've got the campus issue as well to resolve. So, you know, what we do is we converse with the operators. We try and explain to them, you know, why they should be supporting us, and hope that in those conversations, and the fact that, you know, ideally, you know, where you've got competition amongst suppliers, the procurement activities that we carry out help to, you know, increase the competition amongst the suppliers and bring the prices down.
Okay.
I don't know if Boubacar, I don't know if he's hearing what I'm saying, if he's got anything to add to that.
Okay.
Yeah, first of all, I'm sorry. I had a change in an appointment, which I couldn't move further. So, and I hope to come earlier, but with the traffic, so it was impossible. So I apologize for me being late. Because I have just joined, so I cannot really give a lot of input here, but I heard what Tom was saying regarding the operators, and it's actually exactly what we're experiencing here, especially in West and Central Africa, and especially where we have landlocked countries, where generally you don't have, you know, a large offer or competition between operators. So we have been advocating for more than a decade, actually, and to get the operators see NRENs as partners and not, you know, as institutions or organizations that are competing with them, because we actually don't have our own infrastructure. Whatever we need, we lease it, be it, you know, a long-term lease for IUs for 10 or 15 years, or annual lease, or contracts over 3 years, etc. So we have been advocating for a very long time, but we are starting now seeing some of them understanding that we need this partnership. And a comment also that you made, Tom, regarding the host resources we need down to the campuses. And this rule of factor 10 applies, meaning that, you know, if the regional REN spends, let's say $1, at national level, it will be $10, and at the campus level, you know, if you have, you know, to deploy infrastructure on campuses, so you can just, you know, consider that you will have to spend $100. So this is a barrier, of course, I mean, in terms of financing, but it is something that is necessary, especially you know, with the digital transformation that is needed in our institutions. So just short comments on what Tom just said.
Okay. Okay. Welcome, Dr. Barry. It's good to have you here. I know that there are quite a few people on the line who may not be familiar with you. So I realize that you're coming in at the end, but I still would like to introduce you to our conference participants. Dr. Boubacar Barry holds a master's degree in nuclear physics and a PhD in nuclear electronics, all obtained from the Technical University of Dresden in Germany. After his studies, he joined, and forgive me for butchering the name, Université Cheikh Anta Diop of Dakar, also known as the University of Dakar, as a lecturer and researcher, where he taught physics, electronics, and computer networks. Dr. Barry has been director of the Computer Center of UCAD for 8 years. During this period, he set up the first Cisco Regional Academy in Francophone Africa to train specialists in network technologies. In 2006, he joined the Association of African Universities based in Accra as coordinator for the Research and Education Networking Unit. During his 7 years at AAU, he facilitated the creation of the National Research and Education Network in Africa, particularly in Central and West Africa. He's currently the Director General of WICREN, which is the West and Central African Research and Education Network. Welcome to the discussion today. And I'm not quite sure if you're, would you like to make some comments? I know that.
No, I hope that Owen was able to give some of my thoughts that I shared with him just before going to my appointment.
Okay, so as always, it's a pleasure seeing you again.
Thank you, Donna.
We do have a few minutes left, and I really would like to hear the voices of some of the attendees. So again, some of you have been putting your questions in chat, but because we have a few minutes left, I would really like to hear from you. So if you would like to make a comment, an observation, or if you have a specific question for one of the panelists, please raise your hand and we'll be happy to recognize you at this point. Okay. Don't be shy. You know what I can do? I can just actually start calling on people like we're in the class. So this is a wonderful opportunity. It's great to see just the diversity of perspectives that we had here this morning, the opportunities for collaboration in terms of advocacy, but as well as in terms of coming up with, and I love the idea of coming up with some kind of database for a repository for research that provides more information in terms of the cycles as well as the procedures. I think it's another thing that we often need support on as researchers in the area would be on really monitoring and evaluation, because a lot of times people put a tremendous amount of effort into identifying these research opportunities and putting a lot of time into preparing applications and proposals and so forth. But again, because even though there have been opportunities, we still know that there's such a small percent of research actually coming out of Africa. And I quite believe that a lot of it is because we don't have that experience from early on implementing projects and being able to manage those projects effectively. So as you think about the repository, think about ways in which best practice for monitoring, evaluation, and implementation could be resources that could be included in that effort as well. So thank you.
If I could just come in with a little comment on this. I mean, Omar has put some comments in one of the chat windows I've seen. It's a very, building up a repository is a very hard piece of work for it to be effective. Our sister organization, Red Clara in Latin America, has been doing this they've been doing it for some years, but it's an individual that sits down scouring the various sources of potential funding, putting the information into a database. It's very work intensive. So it would be wonderful to have it, but I don't think yet we've got the ideal solution for how to come about bringing it all together.
Yeah.
Maybe just one comment to add to what Tom said. I think that it is, the idea of a repository is very interesting and for monitoring opportunities, but I do also think that it is necessary, for instance, to build capacity, in project writing and in project management. So generally, researchers really don't focus on that, and there are a lot of opportunities that they miss. I know, for instance, it is one of the points I I indicated in my submission. I know, for instance, that in South Africa, the leading universities, I mean, they are really very, very good on that. Or for instance, University of Stellenbosch, they have a department that is specialized actually in accompanying researchers, so that they just give them the ideas and what they are able to do and extracts, and they have a team that is specialized in putting in the right frame project proposals. So these are ideas that we also have could exploit in our institutions, because project writing is project proposal writing is not something easy, and especially when you have several institutions and each institution has its own format and how to submit project. So something is needed there to maximize chances.
Yeah,
And I think,
yeah. Okay.
sorry,
Go
I
ahead, Tom.
was thinking, something else that also needs to be thought about. It's not just the actual proposal. Okay, you need to know your subject area. You need to know what you're trying to achieve and describe that in a way that is going to attract the funder. But very often you're going to be needing to do all sorts of demonstrations of the effectiveness, the appropriateness of an organization. You're going to need to be demonstrating that you meet ethics requirements, anti-fraud, that you've got internal audits in place, that your organization respects rights, there's anti-harassment policies, all sorts of kind of things that you're going to need to be able to demonstrate, that you're going to need to have the paperwork in place for to accompany the proposal. You're going to need someone that's able to help put the budget together, demonstrate what it's all about and how the budget fits in with the work that's going to be done. And then of course you've got to do the reporting afterwards. So there is, I mean, and I speak for this from the perspective of being at an organization that frequently puts in proposals to the European Commission. It's a challenging piece of work.
Yeah, and I think too, people don't often recognize at the onset the level of collaboration necessary to do it effectively, because particularly within universities, some of our lecturers think that this is something can be done independently with maybe a few research assistants. So even having people to share some of their experiences, people who were successful in managing effectively large grants, to really talk about the network involved to enable effectiveness. I know a number of grant funders will often do some webinars. Over this period, I've sat through a few webinars where the grant funders are trying to help researchers access some of these fundings. So again, maybe even, it doesn't have to be a comprehensive repository, but even a list of some of these opportunities, if we could be shared across because lots of times there are empty seats in some of these presentations, could be very beneficial in terms of helping people really understand the level of involvement involved in securing funding for research and actually implementing effective research that will lead to something, some contribution to the field. Okay.
I would like to say something in the line of this collaboration that you just spoke about. There's this question, it's on the chat as well, that always comes up: why TET Fund does not fund private universities? Of course, we tell them that the law in itself doesn't allow us to fund private universities. But beyond that, of course, private universities charge fees anyway. And when you also look at the proportion of the population of those in the public institutions vis-a-vis those in the private, I mean, the public institutions far outweigh. You have, it's in the region of like 90-something% in the public institutions. But then somebody else asked how they can access the national research funding of the TET Fund. For this particular fund, it's open even for lecturers in the private institutions, but there's a caveat that you have to be in collaboration with a lead researcher from a public institution. So that way we try to, expand the umbrella to sort of cater for lecturers, even in the private institutions. So it just crossed my mind when you talked about the fact of the need to collaborate, instead of, trying to do it all alone all the time. So if you do collaborate and you collaborate with resources in the public institution, TET Fund is ready to fund your proposal.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Thank you.
Hi, Donna. I noticed there's a couple of hands up, so we've only got about 5 minutes. So I don't know if we can.
Okay, so yes, let's get to some of those raised hands. And I think EK, forgive me, I'm Nigerian, but sometimes sometimes my 100% Nigerian doesn't work with the names, but Eke Namandi has a hand up. Would you like to pose a question?
Thanks for that. You got the name right, actually. So that's
Thank you.
I'm Ike Namani, CEO Medallion Communication. I was in the earlier panel this morning on infrastructure for the RAN networks. For years, we've been partnering with Wakren. We are the data center hosting the Wakren infrastructure in Lagos and work closely with Eko-Konnect. And part of the reason I wanted to participate and listen in on this particular section was in the earlier section on infrastructure. These were some of the major issues that came up, funding, because there is a big disconnect between the providing infrastructure that is scarce at this time to the public sector that is better able to pay for it or can afford it, compared to the university and educational community that most times simply says they don't have the resources to finance it or are located in very remote areas, which is not commercially viable. So bridging that gap has been a major concern, which we are happy for what has been done through Wakren, at least in some of the ones we've participated in. But I'm also interested, and it's quite enlightening in terms of what is available through TET Fund. I definitely believe, and in fact, privately, I sent Owen a chat that when I'm back to the country, I want to sit with them and see what we can do, because TET Fund needs to open up more in terms of working with the private sector. That is a given. There has to be a structure to enable more collaboration between TET Fund and some of the funding agencies with the private sector, if this is to work. Restricting it to just the government network or interfacing with them, we've seen over time that it has not really helped move this forward, especially as you start to move in country where telecom and ICT infrastructure is scarce. So we are very excited about these opportunities, and it's something we intend to work closely with the team on. I just wanted to put that in. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We also have another question from Omo. Would you like to pose your question now?
Yes, I'll make it very brief because I can see we've run out of time. But I was going to sort of add to the repository discussion that Tom and my boss had started. So, it's there is the view, right, of the repository that both commented on. So in Tom's case, it was a repository of funding opportunities, and in Bubakar's case, it was building capacity for researchers. But there's also another perspective that speaks to TET Fund, improving what TET Fund does. And this is, those that are familiar with the Leap Sense initiative from Wakren would know that we are trying to promote open science. And as part of that, we're talking about research data management subsystems and repositories for content and data. But the other side that sometimes isn't transparent to funders is that these systems also provide interfaces for funders to improve sort of the data quality in the management of their funds and tracking research performance. So, and this is simply by using persistent identifiers. So at the end of the day, we're talking about cost savings for the funding bodies and the researchers, data that can be, that is reusable in the sort of the life cycle of the research grant. And it's easier to now connect the grants to outputs, especially during the publication process. So TET Fund, I heard Dr. Lotu talking about the amount of money they have spent and saying that there is documentation and reports on that, but they're not very visible. So I would encourage TET Fund to consider this sort of REN-supported infrastructure that allows TET Fund to demonstrate its impact a whole lot more and serve the community. And I'm very happy to work with everybody, because there's a question that only Leanne responded to, which I said, how do we sort of leverage the obvious synergies between TET Fund, FCDO, and Africa-Connect 3. So Leanne says she's happy to work on this on a case-by-case basis, but it'll be interesting for TET Fund to sort of see how we can engage on that level as well. So I sort of move this conversation forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, it seems that we're out of time, but I still encourage you. I know that Eko-Konnect will monitor the chat very closely. So even after hours, I'm sure if you leave a message or a comment, they'll find ways to share. So thank you for the conversation, and I'll turn things over to Owen.
Well, first of all, I want to thank everyone for being here, spending their time and data, and also for all the panelists. Thank you so much for being here. And I think we would want to continue the conversation along the lines of what has been discussed here and some of the remarks that have been made by the panelists, Leanne, Tom, Boubacar, and Omar as well. So we can follow up to see how we can all collaborate and move this forward. Dr. Gloria, obviously, I'll be in touch with you to see how we can move some things forward. And I'd just like to mention to the panelists, those of you who might have the time, and to some of the other participants, we have a session tomorrow afternoon, which basically caters for innovation and entrepreneurship for digital transformation in education. So I think some of the conversations that have sort of been seeded here could actually continue in that particular session as well. So I'd like to invite everyone to that session tomorrow afternoon. And before that session in the morning, we'll be having the impact of EduGain in research in Nigeria. So we're going to be having some of Tom Fryer's technical colleagues from Giant and some of the other European NRENs and African NRENs who will talk about federated identity and interfederation and EduGain. So I think that's also going to be a very important service that's going to assist us with moving forward with our digital transformation. So I'd like to thank everyone once again, Leanne, Boubacar, Gloria, Tom, and Donna for doing an excellent job. We really appreciate it. And I think we've learned a lot. I certainly have. And of course, to the audience, thank you so much for being here. And looking forward to seeing you all tomorrow. And as Donna said, if there are any questions, you can drop them in the chat, or you can send emails to us. We will share these presentations and we'll communicate to you how the presentations can be made available to you. So have a wonderful day, afternoon, morning, Donna.
Yeah, I'm still waking up. Have a wonderful day.
Have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.